Hey guys, today we're going to do an update to the original video, which was PhpStorm Xdebug installation and configuration. There's been some minor changes in the newest version of PhpStorm, which is, I believe it's version 2016.1 or 0.2. As a matter of fact, let's just take a look. And the update is this, is that with the old way of installing Xdebug, if you use Composer or perhaps some other programs, if you have Xdebug installed, it actually slows down the performance of some of those other programs. So if you're a person who frequently uses Composer, as I do, you've probably seen the warning a number of times. That is, if you're using Xdebug, where it says running Composer with Xdebug installed can have performance implications or something to that effect. So what PhpStorm has now is when you are running Xdebug, and it depends how you run it, but basically what it'll do is activate Xdebug dynamically or on demand. So when you run your debug configuration, it'll actually turn it on, but then it's not on. So if you have to log into your server for some reason and use Xdebug or Composer, I should say, it's not going to slow you down. So I'll just walk you through the steps here real quick. It's very similar to the first video, just a couple of minor changes. First thing we'll do is, and these steps are for Ubuntu, and doesn't matter if you're running a virtual machine or if you're running an actual server. So let's go ahead and connect to our server. And the first difference is, in the original video, I showed you how to install Xdebug like this with the apt-get repository. But that's no longer valid. I mean, it still works, but this is not what we want to do. So we actually want to go sudo pecl install Xdebug. Alright, so that's all installed. Now what we need to do before we get into setting everything up within PhpStorm is we need to take note of two different file paths. One of them is php.ini and the other is xdebug.so. So the first thing we're going to do is let's find our xdebug.so file. There should only be one xdebug.so file on the server. There we go. So that's that path. Go ahead and write it down or paste it into some external text document just so you'll have easy access to it in a few minutes. The other thing we need to do is see which php.ini file we need to update, because there are multiple on most servers. Okay, so we have three different files here. The one that's in the FPM directory, we can ignore that. The one that's in the CLI directory, we used to add to there, and then also to the Apache 2 directory. But we're actually only going to update one php.ini file, and that's for Apache 2. So let's go ahead and open that up, and this is where you're going to need that file path to the xdebug.so file. So copy it into your clipboard or just have it somewhere handy. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and insert our settings here. And I'll do my best to explain these different extensions as I run down the list. The first one that we're going to do here is let's go ahead and point our php.ini file over to the xdebug.so file. And I have it pasted over here in the document, so I will go ahead and copy that. Okay. Next thing we need to do is let's go ahead and turn default enable on. So so that way it's available to you at all times. Next thing we'll need to do is set up the IDE key. And so the default IDE key for PhpStorm is actually PhpStorm in all caps. You can make it anything you want, but you're going to need to remember what it is because there's somewhere else in a moment I'll show you where we're going to have to use that IDE key. And what that basically is when you are running a web application, so for example a website, and you're running it to the browser, basically you're going to set a cookie that is going to include the IDE key, and PhpStorm is going to be listening for incoming connections, and if you don't have the IDE key, it's not going to register the debug session, and it's not going to debug your code. Okay, so the next thing we need to do here is let's go ahead and enable remote access, because again we're assuming that we're working on a virtual machine or an actual server. We also have to tell it what port we're going to be using. The default port is 9000, and it's perfectly fine to leave it at that, but if you do change it, you need to remember what it is, because again, you're going to need to know that in a few minutes, because there is somewhere where you're going to have to update that. So the next option, and I'll do my best to explain, you need to tell Xdebug one of two things. You're going to need to either tell it the IP address of the remote host, so I don't know, whatever your IP address might be, or you can use remote connect back. And the difference is when you are entering an IP address, you are restricting the use of Xdebug to only requests that originate from that specific IP address. And that's good. So if you're using Xdebug on a production server, that's definitely the option that you'd want to use. You may even want to disable Xdebug on that server until you're ready to use it, but at the very least you'd want to set up a remote host so that way only your IP address can actually access the Xdebug session. Remote connect back basically means it's going to connect back to whatever IP address it came from. So this is great for development server or local development. So I'm going to leave it at that because I'm just using a virtual machine and there's zero security risk for me. And then what we need to do is let's just go ahead and save our settings that we just made, and we'll reload Apache. And now we're done dealing with the server. That's all set up. And so what we need to do now is we need to come up here to PhpStorm Preferences, or if you're on Ubuntu or Windows, it's probably going to be called Settings. And the first thing we need to do is come over here to Languages and Frameworks, PHP Debug. And you're going to see some stuff here. The first thing you'll notice is that the default port, which we just mentioned a moment ago, is 9000. So if you did change that port, here is where you're going to enter that new port number. The other thing that you need to do is create these little bookmarks that you're going to save to your browser for when you're debugging an actual website that's running in the browser. So go ahead and click this link, and I know it might be a little confusing because it's under Xdebugger, but it actually applies to both Xdebug and Xdebugger. Okay, so when we get to this screen here, this is our IDE key. So again, if you changed it earlier in the php.ini file, this is where you need to know it for. So once you've entered the proper IDE key, click Generate. And you're going to get a number of bookmarks, or actually these are just links, but we're going to turn them into bookmarks. All you need to do is click and hold whichever one and drag it on up to your bookmarks bar. That'll just drop it on in there. And so I'm probably going to cover the profiler in another video, but we'll just go ahead and drag these up just so we have them available for later. And so what you're going to do with these is once you have in your browser the website that you want to debug, you're going to click Start Debugger. And that is going to basically set whatever cookies are necessary, or whatever information is necessary, so that way when PhpStorm starts listening for a debug connection, the two play nicely together. So anyway, we've got that. The next thing we're going to want to do here is let's go ahead and open up whatever website we're planning to debug. I've set up just a very simple 3-line type of thing, so it's really not even a site, it's just a file. And I'm only using an IP address because I'm using a virtual machine and I didn't bother to set up a domain name, but obviously it'll work with normal domain names as well. Okay, so this is my website. Literally nothing. So if you've made any changes here, just click apply and click OK and get on out of there. And so I'm going to go ahead and open up my my file. So let's go ahead and set a breakpoint here in PhpStorm. And the reason that I'm not putting it on the line that says message, just a side note, is that when on the line that you pause execution of the code, it is going to pause at the beginning of the line and not at the end. So message will not exist if it pauses right here. I have to come on down to the next line. That's why I just set up some repetitive variable that really does nothing but hold my breakpoint. So let's go ahead and tell PhpStorm to start listening for connections. So we can click this guy here, or we can come up to this menu, run, and start listening for PHP debug connections. And go on over here to your browser and make sure you click Start Debugger. And refresh the page and it should pause execution of our code. And there we go. The debugger pane popped up. The message variable is present, as well as some other global super globals. And that's pretty much it. So thank you very much for watching, and please subscribe to my channel.